Mike Pompeo leaned forward, his voice dripping with arrogance, as he aimed his latest salvo at Jasmine Crockett. The room went quiet, everyone sensing the tension that was about to crackle in the air. "You talk a big game about justice, about fighting corruption," Pompeo said, his eyes scanning the room for effect. "But let's be real, Congresswoman. Your record tells a different story. You say you're for the people, but when it comes down to it, you're just another part of the problem. Hypocrisy at its finest." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd, but Crockett remained still, her expression unreadable. The sharpness of Pompeo's words had struck like a whip, but her composure only made him look more unhinged. She didn't flinch. She didn't react. Pompeo, sensing victory in the air, pressed on. "You've been part of the establishment for how long now? It's time to face the truth. You're just like the rest of them, all talk, no action. The people deserve better than this." The room waited for her response, the air thick with expectation. Crockett's fingers grazed the podium as she stood tall, not with the brashness of an insulted politician, but with the quiet force of someone who had fought battles far greater than this one. Slowly, she lifted her head, locking eyes with Pompeo. Her gaze was calm, but it held something he hadn't expected, a quiet authority that made his words look like nothing more than noise. "Your attack is loud, but it's empty," she said, her voice measured, almost serene. "You speak of hypocrisy. But what I see here is a man who thrives on division, a man who has built a career off the suffering of others, and now, you want to point fingers at me?" Pompeo's smirk faltered. He'd made a calculated move to disarm her, but instead, he'd just unwittingly lit a fuse. "I'm not here to entertain your games, Pompeo," Crockett continued, her voice unwavering. "But I'll tell you this, I've fought for the people, the ones you've ignored. And unlike you, I have no time for distractions. You want to talk about hypocrisy? Let's talk about your record." The room fell into a heavy silence. No one dared to breathe. Pompeo's words had failed to land. And Crockett? She stood unshaken, a calm storm ready to sweep him away. What happened next left the entire room in stunned silence and proved that sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence heavy with anticipation. On one side stood Mike Pompeo, a man who had held some of the highest offices in the land, a former Secretary of State with decades of political maneuvering under his belt. He was the embodiment of the establishment, polished, confident, and relentlessly calculating. He'd built his career on navigating the corridors of power, using influence and privilege to shape policy and control narratives. To Pompeo, politics wasn't just about making decisions, it was a game, a chessboard of strategic moves, and he was always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. Across from him stood Jasmine Crockett, a fresh face in Washington, but one that had already made waves in her short time in office. She wasn't a product of the political elite. She didn't come from a long line of power brokers or privileged families. Crockett was a fighter. She had clawed her way up, not with connections, but with integrity. A lawyer who had spent years fighting for the voiceless, she was the kind of politician who was willing to take on the establishment and hold it accountable. She was the embodiment of change, a voice for the marginalized, a reminder that public service was about serving the people, not oneself. This debate wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a battle between 2 worlds, 2 visions for the future of America. Pompeo represented the status quo, a system built on power and privilege, where decisions were made behind closed doors by those who never had to answer for their actions. Crockett, on the other hand, symbolized the uprising of a new generation, one that demanded transparency, honesty, and real solutions. She was the voice of the people who had long been ignored, the ones who'd seen their futures sacrificed for political expediency. And here they were, in front of a live audience, the world watching as they clashed in a moment that would define not just their careers, but the very direction of the country. It wasn't just another debate. It was a showdown between the old guard and the new. It was the establishment versus the people. The stakes were higher than ever before. Pompeo's carefully crafted narrative of authority was being challenged by a woman who refused to play by his rules. The truth was no longer something he could manipulate or control. And Crockett? She wasn't backing down. Pompeo's attacks had been calculated, meant to rattle her, to throw her off balance. But they didn't land. Instead, they had exposed his desperation. In his eyes, the stakes weren't just about winning a debate, they were about keeping the power structure intact, about maintaining the illusion that the system was working for the people, when in reality, it was working for the few at the top. Crockett wasn't just challenging Pompeo. She was challenging everything he stood for. She was fighting for the very soul of American democracy, where people mattered more than profits, where justice wasn't a transaction, and where accountability wasn't a luxury for the rich and powerful. But what happens next isn't just about politics, it's a moment that will define their careers and impact America's future. It wasn't just another political battle. It was a call to arms, a moment that would force the country to reckon with its own future. As Pompeo stood there, his smirk fading, it became clear that this wasn't going to be an easy win. The tide was turning. Crockett had made her mark, and now it was time to see if she could finish what she started. As the room braced for Crockett's response, no one could predict how this would change everything. Would she seize this moment and turn the tables completely? Or would Pompeo, the seasoned political player, regain control and bury her beneath the weight of his years of experience? The next few moments would decide. Mike Pompeo was no stranger to power. He had navigated its dark corridors for decades, a seasoned politician who had mastered the art of manipulation and influence. Born into a family with connections, Pompeo had quickly risen through the ranks of American politics. He was not just a politician, he was a man of the system, the very embodiment of the establishment. Pompeo's rise to prominence began in the conservative heart of Kansas, where he built a reputation for being fiercely loyal to the political ideologies that aligned with the status quo. After graduating from Harvard Law School, he made his first significant move in the political arena by winning a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. A young, ambitious conservative, he quickly found his niche, aligning himself with the most powerful figures in the GOP. But it wasn't his legislative work that defined him, it was his talent for seizing opportunities, maneuvering behind the scenes, and leveraging the system for his own gain. It wasn't long before Pompeo's ambitions grew. His loyalty to the establishment paid off when he was appointed director of the CIA under President Donald Trump, a role that gave him the kind of access to intelligence and foreign policy that only a select few could dream of. It was in this role that Pompeo's true nature began to emerge. He was unapologetic, relentless, and willing to stretch, or break, the rules if it meant advancing his personal or political goals. His time at the CIA was marked by controversial decisions, some of which would haunt him in later years. His complicity in secretive, often unethical actions, such as backing controversial overseas operations and supporting authoritarian regimes, became his calling card. The media covered it, the public debated it, but Pompeo remained untouchable. He wasn't just playing the game, he was rewriting the rules. When Pompeo made the jump to Secretary of State, it was the pinnacle of his political career. With global influence and political power in his hands, he was positioned to be the architect of U.S. foreign policy for years to come. But even then, he was not above controversy. From handling relations with North Korea, to the deepening crisis in Venezuela, to his unwavering support of Israel's policies, Pompeo was known for his unwavering boldness. However, much of his time in office was tainted by accusations of hubris and a failure to act on critical moments when diplomacy could have prevailed. His arrogant posture, whether in public speeches or diplomatic meetings, earned him both admiration and deep disdain. Pompeo's bravado had made him a star in conservative circles, but it also created a long list of enemies. His personal history of dismissing the press, belittling critics, and handling dissent with disdain was a constant reminder of how power had shaped him. In every debate, every policy speech, he wielded his influence like a blunt weapon, confident that his experience and position would silence any opposition. He had spent decades creating a facade of invincibility, a mask that no one dared to crack, until now. But it wasn't just his political decisions that made Pompeo a controversial figure. It was his ability to sidestep accountability. Throughout his career, he had faced multiple scandals, from his role in questionable intelligence operations to his staunch defense of a president who was embroiled in scandal after scandal. Yet, Pompeo's response to each scandal was always the same: deflect, deny, and reframe. He had mastered the art of avoiding the consequences of his actions, relying on his political allies to shield him from the backlash. As Secretary of State, he was a man whose decisions shaped the world, yet he never had to face the kind of scrutiny that most politicians did. When faced with uncomfortable truths, he simply changed the narrative. It was a strategy that had kept him safe for years. In stark contrast, Jasmine Crockett's rise was grounded in something entirely different. She didn't have the privilege of relying on the system to protect her. She didn't have the luxury of building her career by playing the game. Crockett's politics were rooted in authenticity. A fighter for justice, she wasn't afraid to call out corruption and demand accountability. She was not a product of the political elite, but rather someone who had witnessed firsthand the impact of a broken system. While Pompeo spent decades securing his place in the corridors of power, Crockett had spent her life fighting on the front lines for those who had no voice, no influence, and no power. Where Pompeo used his influence to evade accountability, Crockett was determined to hold those in power to it. She had become a beacon for transparency and integrity, a politician who didn't just make promises, she delivered. In her short time in office, she had already made a name for herself by standing up against the very system that Pompeo had thrived in. She didn't believe in bending the rules to fit a narrative. Instead, she sought to change the rules so that accountability was something every politician would have to face. And now, in this moment, the clash between these two figures was unavoidable. Pompeo's years of political arrogance had led him to believe that his influence and reputation could shield him from any challenge. But Crockett was about to prove that, in the end, power wasn't about who could make the loudest noise, it was about who could stand firm in the face of truth. Pompeo's words were laced with years of political arrogance, but Crockett was about to show him just how little that really meant. Jasmine Crockett's story wasn't one written in the halls of privilege or in the cushioned boardrooms of the elite. It was written on the streets of the communities she fought for, in courtrooms where justice often felt out of reach, and in the faces of the people who had been ignored for too long. She wasn't born into power, nor did she inherit a political legacy. She built her path from the ground up, using the same tools that had been denied to so many: perseverance, grit, and an unshakable belief in justice. Growing up in Dallas, Crockett was no stranger to struggle. She was raised in a working-class neighborhood, where opportunities were scarce, and the odds were often stacked against you. Her parents, though humble, instilled in her the belief that the system wasn't always fair, but it was her duty to make it right. From a young age, she watched her community fight for things that should have been basic rights: good schools, affordable healthcare, equal treatment under the law. But the system didn't seem to care. Crockett saw firsthand how those with power could sidestep accountability, leaving people like her family and neighbors behind. It fueled something inside her, a fire that would drive her to push back against the very forces that had once seemed insurmountable. Crockett attended law school with a singular mission: to make a difference. As a young lawyer, she wasn't content with working at a firm or playing the political game for her own gain. She chose to represent those who had been forgotten by the system, the underserved communities who had no voice in the halls of power. She spent years defending the rights of the underprivileged, taking on cases that seemed impossible to win, and standing up against a justice system that often felt more like an obstacle than a protector. But her career didn't stop at law. Crockett understood that real change didn't come just from the courtroom, it came from changing the system itself. She ran for office not as a career move, but as a mission to bring accountability to the very institutions that had been failing her community for years. She was determined to make the powerful answer for their actions, to hold politicians and corporations accountable for the damage they had done to the people who had trusted them. Her rise in politics wasn't easy. It was hard-fought, driven by late nights, relentless campaigning, and the unyielding belief that one person could indeed make a difference. But her authenticity and commitment to justice earned her respect, and, as expected, enemies. Crockett didn't just challenge the political establishment, she shattered the glass ceiling with her willingness to speak truth to power. Whether it was taking on corrupt local politicians or standing firm against national figures who thought they were untouchable, she showed the world that she wasn't afraid to challenge the system, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. What made Crockett different wasn't just her policies, though. It was her heart, her deep understanding of the people she served. She wasn't a politician first, she was an advocate for the people, always listening, always ready to fight for the rights of those who had no voice. It was this deep empathy that set her apart from the political elite. She didn't make decisions based on polls or political gain, she made them based on what was right. It was this fundamental approach that made her an immediate threat to the establishment, and why someone like Pompeo saw her as an obstacle to the way things had always been. Crockett's ability to dismantle the narratives built by those in power came not from textbook knowledge or political strategizing, but from a lived understanding of what was at stake. She didn't just see the abstract debates about policy. She saw the real-world consequences, families struggling to make ends meet, children going to schools that were underfunded, communities suffering from neglect. She had been that child, that family, and those people. Her journey had made her stronger, more determined, and far more capable than anyone could have imagined. Her first taste of national attention had come after she took on a powerful figure within her own state government, a politician with a long history of evading responsibility for corruption. Crockett had exposed his misdeeds with such clarity and tenacity that it not only toppled his career, but it also established her as a force to be reckoned with. She didn't do it for fame or recognition, she did it because the people deserved better. It was a taste of the kind of power that came from speaking truth to the powerful, and it had emboldened her to keep pushing forward. Her reputation as a truth-teller, as someone who could take on the giants of the political world and win, had made her a favorite of those who had long been ignored, but it had also made her a target. She was seen by some as the future, a beacon of hope for a more transparent and accountable government. To others, she was a threat. A reminder that the rules could still be bent, but they could also be broken. To them, Crockett represented everything they had built their careers to protect, the political game. And now, in this moment, she stood across from Pompeo, ready to face the very forces she had spent her entire career fighting. He was the embodiment of the system she had battled against, the elite, the powerful, the ones who thought they could get away with anything. He had lived a life sheltered from accountability, immune to the consequences of his actions. But Crockett wasn't intimidated. She had spent her entire career fighting for truth and accountability, and now, with one simple response, she was about to dismantle the powerful narrative Pompeo had built. Her calm was more than just composure, it was the silence before a storm. The room was electric with tension as Mike Pompeo's next words cut through the silence. His smug grin was back, and he leaned into his microphone, as if preparing to unleash a final blow. He'd seen Crockett's calm, and it irked him. For someone so inexperienced in the political game, she had shown an unnerving amount of composure. And it was that calmness, that unshakable confidence, that Pompeo was determined to break. "You've had your moment, Congresswoman," Pompeo began, his tone sharp and dismissive. "But let's talk facts, shall we? Your record is full of holes. You claim to be for the people, but when it's time to make real decisions, you've caved to the pressures of the political machine. You've voted for corporate interests, you've supported legislation that harms the very people you claim to represent. You've made deals with the same people you claim to fight against. You've shown your true colors." The words hit like daggers. The room tensed, waiting for Crockett to flinch. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her gaze remained steady, her posture unyielding. She had been here before, in rooms filled with more venom, in debates far more vicious than this. She had faced down corruption, and she wasn't about to be thrown off course by another baseless attack. Pompeo's voice grew louder, more forceful. "You talk about standing up for justice, but where's the action? You've sided with lobbyists. You've backed policies that hurt the very communities you claim to represent. How is that, fighting for the people, Congresswoman? You're no different from the very politicians you criticize. You're a part of the system, just like the rest of them. Each word was an attempt to dig deeper, to tear her apart with half-truths and hyperbole. But Crockett stood tall, her hands clasped firmly in front of her, her eyes never leaving his. She had fought these battles her entire career. She wasn't about to let someone like Pompeo twist her record with lies. Pompeo, sensing an opening, went for the jugular. You like to talk about accountability, don't you? Well, where was your accountability when it mattered? You voted for bills that were sold as helping the people, but all they did was line the pockets of big corporations. The very people you pretend to be against. You've betrayed the people you claim to represent. The crowd shifted uneasily, murmurs of disbelief starting to spread. But Crockett's voice, when it came, was quiet, measured, almost soothing in its calmness. Mr. Pompeo, with all due respect, she began, her eyes locked on him, the difference between you and me is simple. I fight for people who don't have a voice. People who are crushed under the weight of policies designed to benefit the few. You've spent your career making deals with the powerful. You've surrounded yourself with those who profit off the suffering of others. You don't fight for the people. You fight to protect the system that exploits them. Pompeo's face reddened, his teeth gritted. She had deflected his attack with a single sentence. Crockett wasn't shaking. She wasn't backing down. And that seemed to infuriate him even more. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Pompeo shot back, his voice dripping with contempt. But the truth is, you're just another pawn in a game you don't understand. The people you claim to fight for, they're not listening. They never will. You're just another part of the noise. The crowd was beginning to sense the shift. The words Pompeo had used to try and discredit Crockett were now falling flat. He was no longer the calm, controlled politician, he was the desperate, defensive figure who was losing control of the narrative. His attacks, once sharp and calculated, were now becoming reckless, personal, vitriolic. Crockett's composure only seemed to deepen with each attack. You're wrong, Mr. Pompeo, she replied, her voice calm yet unwavering. The people are listening. They're paying attention to what you've been saying for years, and they see the truth. You've spent your career in the backrooms, making deals that hurt the people you're supposed to serve. I'm not here to play that game. I'm here to change it. Pompeo's smirk faltered, his frustration beginning to show. You think you can change the system? You're just a part of it now, Crockett. You're as much a cog in the machine as anyone else. Crockett's eyes narrowed, but her voice never raised above a calm, controlled pitch. You can keep telling yourself that, Mr. Pompeo, but the truth is, you've lost touch with what really matters. You've lost touch with the people. And no matter how many times you attack my record, you'll never be able to erase that. The room grew even quieter, the weight of her words sinking in. Pompeo's attacks were becoming more personal, but they were losing their sting. Crockett had weathered the storm of his criticism without breaking a sweat, without raising her voice or giving him the satisfaction of seeing her rattle. With every word, the tension built. Pompeo's attacks were becoming more personal, but Crockett's confidence was only growing. The air in the studio felt heavier as the exchange between Mike Pompeo and Jasmine Crockett reached its boiling point. Pompeo's last words hung in the air, but Crockett didn't react to his smirk or the arrogant way he leaned back in his chair, clearly convinced he had gained the upper hand. No, Crockett had spent her entire career preparing for this, not just to win, but to make sure her victory carried weight. She wasn't here to merely engage in a verbal sparring match. She was here to dismantle the very narrative that had been built up around people like Pompeo, a narrative that shielded him and others like him from accountability. When she finally spoke, the studio seemed to grow quieter. You say I'm part of the problem, Mr. Pompeo? Crockett began, her voice calm but cutting. Well, let's talk about the problem. Let's talk about the system you've protected for decades. Pompeo opened his mouth, but she wasn't finished. You and your friends in the establishment talk a good game about accountability, but it's nothing more than smoke and mirrors. You've spent your entire career brushing aside the voices of the people, all while pocketing the benefits of a broken system. Crockett's eyes didn't leave Pompeo's. You want to accuse me of hypocrisy? Of making deals with corporate interests? Let me remind you, Mr. Pompeo, that you've been in bed with the very people who are robbing this country blind. You think people don't see it? You think they don't see how you've turned your back on the same people you claim to serve? The studio was silent now, everyone on edge. The tension was palpable, but Crockett remained as poised as ever. She was unraveling Pompeo's carefully constructed narrative with each word. You're a man who defended the status quo, the same status quo that lets Wall Street and corporate giants run this country into the ground. You're a man who didn't bat an eye when families across the country were left to fend for themselves, while you and your colleagues padded your pockets with special interests. And yet, you're here, lecturing me about accountability. About integrity. You, who defended a system that thrives on inequality and division. Pompeo's eyes narrowed, but Crockett wasn't about to let him off the hook. She had already seen through the facade. She had seen it all before, the empty rhetoric, the carefully timed defenses, and the repeated denials of any wrongdoing. But today, she wasn't just going to expose him for the hypocrite he was, she was going to make sure the entire country saw it too. You like to point the finger at me, Mr. Pompeo. But let me tell you something. You've spent your life selling lies and fear to the American people. You talk about my record, but where were you when communities were being torn apart by your policies? Where were you when families in Flint were still drinking poisoned water? Where were you when people of color were being unjustly targeted by law enforcement, with no one to answer for it? She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every word. I've spent my career fighting against that, fighting against the systems you've worked so hard to protect. I've stood in the trenches with the people you've ignored, and I've seen the damage your policies have caused. But you don't care. You never have. The people don't matter to you, Mr. Pompeo. What matters to you is your power. And that's where you and I are different. Pompeo's expression was turning darker with every word, his confidence wavering. You've been able to talk a big game, but the people know what you really stand for. They know you're just another politician, just another cog in the machine, pretending to fight for justice while you do nothing to change it. Crockett smiled, a small, knowing smile. The people aren't as blind as you think, Mr. Pompeo. They're tired of hearing the same empty rhetoric. They're tired of being told that everything's fine, that the system is working, when all it's really doing is working for the rich and powerful. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. The studio was dead silent. Everyone was waiting, breath held, for what she would say next. You talk about me making deals with corporate interests. Let's talk about your friends in big business. You've sold them the country's future, and you did it in broad daylight, with a smile on your face. You sold them wars. You sold them policies that hurt the most vulnerable. And when things went wrong, when your policies left people in need, you were nowhere to be found. You were too busy picking up your paycheck. Pompeo shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable now. His mouth opened, but the words didn't come. He wasn't prepared for this. He had underestimated Crockett's resolve, her understanding of the system he had spent his entire life trying to protect. But Crockett wasn't done yet. The truth is, Mr. Pompeo, you've spent your life pretending to be a man of the people while you've been helping the very forces that oppress them. You're not a hero. You're a symptom of the problem. And no matter how many times you try to shift the blame, the people know the truth. The crowd in the studio shifted, a sense of awe beginning to ripple through them. They had expected a heated debate, but what they were witnessing was something far more powerful. Crockett wasn't just engaging in a political back and forth, she was exposing the truth, a truth Pompeo had spent his entire career avoiding. Pompeo tried to regain control, but his confidence was shaken. He fumbled with his words, attempting to shift the conversation back to his original attack. But it was too late. Crockett's words had cut deeper than he could have ever imagined. And in that moment, Pompeo realized something: the debate wasn't just about who could outsmart the other with a clever argument. It was about who had the moral high ground, and Crockett, with her unflinching commitment to justice and truth, had just taken that ground from him. The room, once filled with the tension of a political showdown, was now silent. The weight of Crockett's words hung in the air, undeniable and heavy. She had done more than expose Pompeo's hypocrisy. She had dismantled the narrative he had spent years building. In that moment, Pompeo had lost more than just the debate, he had lost the respect of the nation. The moment the debate ended, the studio was engulfed in a stunned silence, the kind that lingered in the air like smoke after a bombshell had gone off. But outside the confines of the studio, the real explosion was just beginning. Within minutes, clips from the confrontation flooded social media, each one more viral than the last. Hashtags began trending almost immediately: hashtag Crockett crushes Maher, hashtag truth over rhetoric, hashtag Pompeo exposed. Every platform erupted with reactions, memes, and breakdowns of the now infamous moments when Jasmine Crockett had deftly dismantled Mike Pompeo's attacks, exposing his hypocrisy for the world to see. The words she had spoken, calm but cutting, were being shared across every corner of the internet, and her followers, who had been building steadily for years, now exploded. On Twitter, the response was swift and overwhelming. Celebrities, influencers, and ordinary citizens alike were singing her praises. One tweet from an outspoken progressive influencer read, "Jasmine Crockett just did what so many of us have been waiting for, called out the establishment for their lies, and did it with grace. This is what real leadership looks like." Another user tweeted, "Mike Pompeo got destroyed. Crockett just proved that truth and integrity have a place in politics, and it's the future. Hashtag Crockett crushes Maher." But it wasn't just supporters of Crockett who took to social media. Critics of Pompeo and the political establishment saw this moment as their call to arms. The hashtag spread like wildfire, with tweets analyzing every part of Crockett's response, breaking down her facts, and celebrating her authenticity. The air was thick with validation, as people from all walks of life shared the video, engaging in the debate that was now igniting across the globe. "At Jasmine Crockett took no prisoners today," tweeted one political commentator. Her command of the issues was unmatched. And let's be real, this wasn't just a political win. This was a moral win. Instagram wasn't far behind. Clips of the debate flooded the platform's stories, with influencers posting them alongside their commentary. "This moment was history," one post said, accompanied by a slow-motion clip of Crockett's final mic drop response. Another shared a screenshot of Pompeo's flustered expression during the exchange, captioned, "When you think you've got the upper hand, but the truth hits harder." By the time the evening news came around, the entire debate had been analyzed, dissected, and reshaped. Every political figure from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Bernie Sanders was commenting on the exchange. Crockett's name was trending in all the right places, and pundits, commentators, and activists alike were lining up to echo her sentiment. This wasn't just a debate. It was a movement. The backlash against Pompeo and Maher's comments grew louder with each passing hour. His remarks were being recontextualized in ways that would haunt him for months to come. Memes flooded the internet, often comparing his comments to the very kind of elitism Crockett had deconstructed. One popular meme showed a picture of Pompeo's face frozen in shock, with the caption, "When you realize the people are done with your lies." Political pundits began to question whether Maher, who had spent his career positioning himself as a voice of reason in American politics, had just made a fatal misstep. His comments had been condescending, and his attempt to discredit Crockett now seemed even more out of touch. Was this the beginning of the end for Maher's career? Had he finally crossed the line between critical comedy and outright disrespect? The backlash was growing, and it wasn't just coming from the left. Even centrist commentators who had once defended Maher's biting brand of humor were now questioning if he had gone too far. Social media influencers took to TikTok to react to the debate, posting videos with millions of views breaking down every word Crockett had said, highlighting her ability to stand her ground. Many of them posed the same question: why was it that when women of color, especially those from working-class backgrounds, stood up and spoke the truth, they were belittled and dismissed, until they were proven right? And why was someone like Pompeo, who had held so much power and influence, now being dragged through the mud, finally held accountable by a woman who spoke truth to power? Mainstream outlets also took notice. CNN and MSNBC aired entire segments dedicated to dissecting the exchange, showing the viral moments of Crockett's calm, assertive dismantling of Pompeo. One pundit on CNN said, "What Crockett did today was something we rarely see in politics, a true stand for the people, for accountability, and for honesty." She didn't just answer Pompeo's attacks, she exposed him for what he really is. But for all the praise Crockett was receiving, the true shockwaves were being felt on the side of Mike Pompeo and Bill Maher. Maher, who had built a career on questioning others and poking at the power structures of the nation, now found himself at the center of the very criticism he had so often levied against others. His comments were no longer funny or cutting, they were revealed to be divisive, patronizing, and at worst, racist. His status as a commentator seemed suddenly fragile. The debate had not only exposed Pompeo's hypocrisy but had cracked the image Maher had spent years building. As the debate raged on, Maher's career faced its biggest crisis. Could this be the moment that redefines him forever? Would he be able to recover from the backlash, or had his position as a leading voice in political commentary been irreparably damaged? The answers seemed uncertain, and with each passing minute, the firestorm surrounding Maher only seemed to grow hotter. Meanwhile, Crockett's moment had solidified her place in the political conversation. People were talking about her. People were listening. The country had just witnessed a moment that wasn't about just one debate, it was about the future of accountability, integrity, and real change in American politics. The shockwaves of this exchange were just beginning to reverberate, and for Maher, the fallout was only just starting. As the dust settled and the social media storm raged on, Jasmine Crockett took a moment, not to bask in her victory, but to reflect on the greater significance of what had just transpired. This wasn't just about defeating Mike Pompeo in a debate. It wasn't about one more political showdown where a point was scored. No, this was about something much more fundamental. It was about truth. It was about integrity. It was about exposing the very system that had allowed the powerful to manipulate the narrative for far too long. Crockett, calm but unwavering, stood tall as the echoes of her words reverberated through the country. She knew the fight wasn't over. It had just begun. She addressed the millions who had tuned in, from the politically engaged to the everyday citizen who had never paid attention to the inner workings of government. What we saw today, she began, her voice steady, her words deliberate, wasn't just about winning a debate. It wasn't just about proving a point. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the powerful try to silence you. For Crockett, this was the essence of her life's work, not just to call out the corruption of the political elite, but to make sure the truth was heard above the noise. She had spent years fighting for the people, for justice, for those who had been ignored and left behind by the system. In this debate, she had done what she had always done, she had fought for transparency. She had fought for the accountability that was so desperately needed in a country where those in power seemed to skate by with impunity. Her gaze softened, but her message remained clear: we are told, time and again, that the powerful are untouchable. That the system is too broken to fix. That one person can't make a difference. But I am here to tell you that is a lie. The truth is the most powerful weapon we have. It cuts through the lies, the corruption, and the manipulation. And if we stand together, if we demand accountability, no matter how high the stakes, no matter who is in the room, we can change this country. She paused, letting her words sink in, letting the weight of them settle into the hearts and minds of her listeners. She knew the road ahead would be long. There would be more battles to fight, more systems to tear down, and more lies to expose. But Crockett wasn't in this fight alone. The people were with her, and as long as she had their support, the truth would always be on their side. This fight, Crockett continued, isn't just about politics. It's about something much bigger. It's about ensuring that justice is not a luxury for the few, but a right for all. It's about ensuring that the voices of the silenced, the forgotten, are heard. It's about making sure that those who have spent their lives profiting from our pain are held accountable. Her eyes hardened, reflecting the fierceness of her resolve. I didn't stand up today just for me, I didn't stand up for the people in that room. I stood up for every person who has ever been told their voice doesn't matter. I stood up for every person who has ever felt powerless. I stood up for every person who's ever been silenced by the system. This is our fight, not just mine. And it's a fight we will win. The silence in the room, and across the nation, spoke volumes. For the first time, people saw something they had long been deprived of: hope. Hope that change was possible. Hope that truth could stand up to the powerful. Hope that accountability wasn't just a dream, but a tangible reality that could be achieved if only enough people had the courage to demand it. The truth has a way of coming out, Crockett said, her voice softening but carrying the weight of her conviction. No matter how hard you try to bury it, no matter how many lies you tell, it will always rise to the surface. The powerful may have the money, the connections, and the influence, but they don't have the truth. And that, my friends, is a power they can never buy. She looked into the camera, speaking directly to the viewers, to the people who had watched her expose the flaws of the political elite. I am not here for applause. I am here for change. And if you want to be part of that change, if you want to make sure that we never go back to a system that ignores the truth, I need you to stand with me. Stand with the people who have fought and died for the freedom we hold dear. Stand with the generations who have come before us, and the ones who will come after us. Stand with truth. Stand with justice. The crescendo of her words built as she finished her speech, not with a final slam, but with a simple but profound message that echoed beyond the debate. In the end, we are not defined by the power we hold. We are defined by the truth we stand for. Her words hung in the air like a clarion call, a moment of clarity in the midst of the chaos. This wasn't just a victory in a debate, it was a movement that had begun, one that would grow louder and stronger with each passing day. The battle for justice was far from over, but Crockett had proven that with courage, integrity, and the unyielding belief in truth, the fight could be won. And in that moment, Crockett reminded us all, the truth will always have the last word. As the dust settles on this powerful moment, one thing remains clear: what we witnessed today was far more than just a debate. It was a pivotal moment in the fight for truth and justice. Jasmine Crockett didn't just take on Mike Pompeo, she took on the entire corrupt system that's been allowed to thrive unchecked for far too long. Her words were a reminder to us all that when we stand together, when we speak the truth, no power can silence us. This is more than politics. This is about standing up for what's right, for holding those in power accountable, and for demanding a government that works for the people, not the powerful. It's about ensuring that truth, transparency, and integrity take center stage, no matter how much the elite try to suppress it. But this isn't the end. This is just the beginning. The fight for justice, for accountability, for truth is ongoing. And we all have a role to play. You have a voice, you have the power to make a difference, and it starts now. If you believe in truth, justice, and standing up to the powerful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Spread the message far and wide. Let's make sure that the fight for accountability continues to grow, that the truth is never silenced again. The fight for integrity, for a better future, is just beginning, and we need you to be part of it. Join the movement, and be part of the change.